Withology is about collaboration, inspiration, dedication, influence, and positive manifestation. It's about the stories behind success, something everyone needs a little bit of help achieving. Join host Brian Tierney, CEO of Brian Communications, as he interviews the most successful business and industry leaders to hear the fascinating stories about their personal journeys and the people who have helped them get to where they are today. Welcome to Withology.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Withology. I'm Brian Tierney, CEO of Brian Communications, and today I'm excited and delighted to welcome Jami McKeon, Chair of Morgan Lewis. It's the seventh largest law firm in the world, and it's the largest led by a woman. And Jami's going to be my special guest in this live episode of Withology, which we're taping at the PHL Innovation Festival here in Philadelphia. Jami's been with Morgan Lewis, a multinational law firm with 2,000 lawyers and specialists in 31 offices across North America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East for more than 40 years, and she served as chair for the past 7. In addition to her work at Morgan Lewis, she's on the board of Harvard Law School's Center on the Legal Profession, Penn Law, we would call it the University of Pennsylvania Law School, Penn Law, Equal Justice Works, a nonprofit that promotes a lifelong commitment to public service, and the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts. Jami also makes it a priority to establish Morgan Lewis as a force for good in the community. Her firm provides pro bono legal support to more than 1,800 organizations every year. And in fact, the firm committed nearly 140,000 hours to pro bono services just last year. Jami, it's an absolute pleasure to have you join me today. Let's start at the beginning. You grew up in Morristown, New Jersey. Tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah, actually, I was born in New York City at Mount Sinai Hospital. My mom was a Broadway dancer before she became pregnant with me and quit. But we eventually ended up outside New York in a town called Morristown, New Jersey. And I have 2 sisters and a brother.
Because I know you in high school, too, as well, and those aspects of after-school fun stuff, things like that.
Yeah, I got my mom to end up coming to choreograph our high school show when we didn't have a choreographer. And that started a second 20-year career for her where she directed and choreographed high school and local shows. And my sister Bonnie ended up going and dancing on Broadway, too. So lots of fun with the theater in our family.
Let's talk about the connection between actors, theater, and lawyers, too, as well. That's a part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly for those of us, so I was a trial lawyer. So, there's a lot of theater involved in trying cases, obviously. You're on your feet, you're speaking. I'm reluctant to call it a performance because that sounds like it doesn't come from the heart, and that's not true. Good trial lawyers are passionate about what they do and believe in their cases. But there is, I think, it's very common to find people who are trial lawyers who had some background in theater.
But even if it's a non-jury trial, the judge himself, there's a certain level of kind of how you present that, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's true. And it's really true for anything. I mean, essentially, if you think about what lawyers do mostly, it's persuasion, right? You're representing somebody, you're an advocate, whether you're closing a deal, whether you're in a courtroom, whether you're negotiating with the government, by and large, what you're doing is you're trying to persuade people of, whatever it is that is in your client's interest.
In 2014, your first year as chair, the firm, which is a storied firm, Morgan Lewis, goes back decades and it's incredibly respected, but you almost doubled the size of the firm your first year as chair when you merged with the Bingham McKeon law firm. Talk about that integration process and cultures and all those sorts of things. Must be so challenging.
It was, and it was interesting. And, people either called it bold or crazy until they saw how it worked out. Unfortunately, worked out. Yeah, I started with Morgan Lewis right out of law school. I always say I've had 2 jobs in my life, lifeguard and lawyer at Morgan Lewis. So I started at Morgan Lewis in 1981. So I've been with the firm for 40 years, actually 40 years this month. And so when I took over as the chair of the firm, we had about 1,100 lawyers. And we were kind of ensconced in, I would call kind of the middle of the big law firms. And we were somewhat global, but we knew we really needed to grow, not necessarily in size, but that we needed to sort of achieve a lot of different strategic objectives. And in the summer of 2014, right before I officially took over as chair, I was introduced to the leadership of the Bingham firm. And after a few months, we entered into a combination that resulted in all of their firm, lawyer staff, everybody joining us. That was about 750 people. So it was quite a large thing to do. And we attacked it sort of with a view that we really wanted to marry these two firms and marry these two cultures. So every single person, whether they worked in the mailroom or whether they were the most senior partner, had a buddy at Morgan Lewis who we kind of matched up personally. And we tried that out before, really. In 2003, we brought on about 160 people from the Brobeck firm in California. At the time, we thought that was a huge big deal, right? So 160 people, and we used this buddy system. It worked really well. We had co-heads of a lot of different things, and we just really put our backs into building the personal connections, because I really believe that what makes any organization successful and also just more enjoyable is if you really feel connected to the people there. And so we made the people connections sort of our top priority, with the belief and confidence, which proved to be true, that if you get the people connected to each other, the business will follow. And so I think that was really the way we approached it. And it turned out to be, the right way to approach it.
Because it's a sensitive thing. And I've been involved with a lot of mergers and acquisitions for clients. So there's a certain sensitivity. The company, the one organization may feel a tremendous sense of loss. We're being taken over, kind of a thing. And what you were trying to do is to say, this is important for all of us to grow together, and we're going to blend this together. And that's really smart, because it's often not done.
Well, I agree with you. And I think your point is really true. There is a sense of loss. The Bingham firm was a fantastic firm, great reputation, fabulous lawyers. We were so lucky to have those folks join us. But if you've spent the last 10 years or 20 years or more, walking around with a briefcase on it that says Bingham McKeon,
right,
and all of a sudden the sign on your building says Morgan Lewis. And it happened when the Brobeck people joined us as well. There is a sense of loss. And so it was important for us to make sure that everybody knew that we didn't view this as some sort of absorption. We viewed this almost in the way you view a marriage. You're gaining a family, not losing something, not losing your identity. And I will say that I think one of the things our firm has done well is, over the years, when we've been fortunate enough to have people join us, we are really open to learning about things that they do that maybe are better than the way we do them or different than the way we do them. I mean, probably a silly example, it'll sound like now, but when the folks from Brobeck joined us, they were like, you're using Lotus Notes? Why aren't you using Outlook? They were a California firm. They were sort of ahead of the game. And we switched, because we realized that they actually had a better system than we had. So I think it's really important whenever you bring groups of people together that you're getting the best of everything, and that you view it as a chance to change for the better, not it's our way or the highway.
It's also really valuable for the client too, because you want your clients, I would think, to say, we now have this new wonderful capability and these great new talents. And then that ratifies the decision of the Bingham firm to feel like, well, this is really, there's a 1 + 1 = 3 here by us getting together with these folks.
Yeah, well, you're more modest than we are. We always say 2 + 2 has to equal 7. So, but I think you make a really good point. The reason you do this, in my own opinion, no law firm should grow just for the sake of growth. Right. What you're doing is you're enhancing your services to the clients that you serve, and you're enabling yourself to serve more clients. And one of the things that people sometimes accuse law firms of doing, and I think it's true of some, happily not of ours, is, people think of lawyers sometimes as kind of being elbows out or every man for himself. And if you're a firm where people view your competition as internal, you're never going to be able to be the best firm you can be or give the best services to clients. Instead, part of that reason you want everybody to know each other and know each other's practices is you want to be able to say, Brian, I really want to introduce you to my partner, John, because John is terrific at XYZ. If I'm more worried about, hey, I want to hold on to that relationship with Brian, I may not be the best at everything.
Right. And by letting go a little bit, you're actually picking up and growing and the clients benefiting and things like that. It's interesting. I'm a non-practicing lawyer. I'm a member of the bar, but I've spent my years in marketing and advertising and public relations, but I know a lot of lawyers. There's a fellow named Dr. Larry Richard, who I know you're very familiar with, who talks about, he does a lot of work in the area of the psychology of lawyers. And when he talks about the excellent lawyers, those who he ranks as the best, they have the highest scoring traits, like 90th percentile for skepticism, 89th% in terms of autonomy. They want to be their own thing. It's like herding cats. And then he gives them the lowest possible score, or one of the lowest scores, at 12th percentile on sociability. And optimism. And then you're also merging across countries and borders and cultures too, as well, because now you're, in so many different, talk about that, what it's like.
Well, you have to go meet those people. You have to provide opportunities for them to meet each other. I mean, this is a timely discussion because we bring our entire partnership together from around the world every year for a week. And it's usually third week in October. And a lot of firms don't do that anymore. They may just bring practice groups together, or they may do every other year, but we continue to do that because of our conviction that you're only as strong as the relationships you have with one another. I mean, our tagline for our associates is relationships matter. And that is our view with our clients, with each other. And so, of course, we were virtual last year, and we had to make the decision to be virtual again this year. Some of our colleagues from other countries still can't come over here. And it's really painful. I think we do a great job with our virtual program, but we like to be together. Last week in Philadelphia, we brought our leadership team together, our advisory board and our practice group leaders, and I gave them the choice, and everybody wanted to be in person. So we had about 40 people together in a meeting in person, all vaccinated. Everybody at our firm is vaccinated. And I actually entertained everybody at our home for dinner afterwards. And my husband said to me later, I've never seen so many grownups look so happy like little kids. Everybody was just glad to be together. And we really miss that. And we miss that we're not going to be together in person this week. I think that's an important part of sort of connecting with people. But, your comments about Larry Richard. So I felt very fortunate because I got to know Larry right around the time I became the chair of the firm. And I think the year that the Bingham folks joined with us, I oriented my keynote around Larry's description of lawyers. And what's really interesting is he's done studies with more than 10,000 lawyers, and the statistics you recited are true really across ages, across geographies, across genders, across practices. There's just something about lawyers that lead to those things. And if you think about it, it's not surprising because those traits make them good at being a lawyer, right? So who wants a lawyer who says, hey, don't worry about reading that deal carefully. Like, I'm sure we're dealing with somebody who's honorable. Or, well, why would I cross-examine that person on the witness stand? I mean, why would she lie? You don't want that lawyer. What you want is somebody who is anal retentive, absolutely obsessive about making sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed, and that every bad thing you can think of has been thought of. You want somebody who is the most skeptical person you can think of, right? Because you're the optimist. You're doing the deal. You're running your business. You're like, this is going to be great. We're going to combine with this other company. We're going to do this other thing. Your lawyer's job is to say, Brian, here's all the things that could go wrong. So those personality traits make people great lawyers. But then the question is, now you bring all those people together in an organization and you're trying to build a great organization, and you're starting with people whose whole approach is what could go wrong? What if something's not going to be not going to go right? So I actually found the self-awareness of Larry's study and being able to say to people, hey, let's recognize this about ourselves. Let's recognize that the things that make us great lawyers are things that we have to actually set aside or overcome, not just when it comes to being part of an organization, but our whole home lives. I mean, how often have you heard people make jokes or cracks about how hard lawyers are to live with or to be married to or any of those things? Because they're always complaining, nitpicking, picking an argument, thinking about what can go wrong, right? So it's good to be aware of that, because then it makes you stop and say, okay, wait a minute, I've got to bring those other sides of my personality to the table. I have to let those other things, my creativity, the creativity that I bring to representing clients, the innovation that I bring to client problems, my problem solving skills. I have to make sure that all those things are not being overrun by my skepticism or desire to be in charge of everything.
Yeah, and that is a key balance. As a lawyer, lots of times being in meetings with lawyers, and you have some lawyers, understandably, who always are looking at what could go wrong, what could go wrong. But you and I have had discussions about this before, and even the merger. I mean, I guess there were certain risks, but at the same time, we also know there's a lot of risk in lives and in businesses and for clients if they do nothing. So risk, when people have said to you, "Oh, you're taking a big risk," you've talked about that's framing the question wrong when it comes to certain kind of business decisions you have to make. Talk about that.
I think so. And I think, look, the things we've been talking about, the examples of our growth are perfect examples of that. There are people who looked and said, wow, this is a big risk. Well, my answer to that is you're taking a risk whether you act or whether you don't. It's just which risk you want to take, right? So there is a risk in just standing still, especially in the world we've all been living in for the last 20 years. I think the first 20 years of my practice of law, certainly the first 10, before technology made the world smaller, every firm was kind of a regional firm. It had its clients in the area. You could sort of choose to stay who you were. You didn't have to, adapt to new things. I think in the world we're living in now, there is no business that can just stand still. That's not an option. It's a risk if you choose not to take an opportunity. Now, sometimes maybe the risks of the opportunity are too great, but that's your job as a CEO, is to engage in that cost benefit analysis, that risk benefit analysis. And when you look at, for example, the combination we did, I was very confident that our team had punched up the whole thing and that we really knew what the strengths were, what the weaknesses were, what the things that we could control were, what the things that we couldn't control were. And so it was far from certain that it was going to be the great success that it has turned out to be. But I was confident that the risk associated with doing that transaction was a better risk, in my view, than not doing it and proceeding more slowly on a strategic plan that had many, many components that would be addressed by doing this and that otherwise would have to be done in a serial way. Of course, if it had worked out differently, somebody would look and say, well, she took too big a risk, right? But I mean, that's just part of the job. And you can't be so risk averse that you're not willing to take one.
And we've seen it so often in business, in law firms that are no longer around or that have kind of dwindled down because of that. There's a great story about Eastman Kodak. I mean, they actually came up with the patents for digital photography back in the 70s and then just sat on them because it would risk their existing business, which was selling film.
Right.
There's a lot of talk, particularly right now in COVID, but in life in general too, and people are sensitive to it with, two careers, a work-life balance. It is kind of a false way to look at it, isn't it? Like there's some perfect balance that you could find. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have been very vocal about the fact that I really don't like that phrase because it implies that there's work and there's life. And that's just not true. It's all life, right? Life is your work. It's your family. It's your health. It's your everything that you do is part of your life. And your goal is to have a life that feels in balance. So if you juxtapose it as work and life are at opposite ends of a spectrum or are competing for your attention, it's really hard to get that right. I think the way to look at it is your life in balance? Are you satisfied with the balance that you have overall? Now, I also think it's really important not to evaluate that on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, sometimes week by week or month by month basis, because there are going to be times where you're out of balance. Something is going wrong. I mean, talk about COVID. Your kids aren't in school and are frustrated. You have people in your family who are ill. Maybe you're ill. There's all sorts of things that actually can happen that are going to make your balance not exactly right, sometimes for longer periods of time. So I think it's important to take a step back and look at the overall arc of your life and whether or not you feel that the different components of it can be in harmony with one another, that you can integrate all the parts of your life in a way that works for you. If the answer to that is yes, then even though you may feel out of balance sometimes, you're going to be satisfied with where you are. If the answer to that is no, I can't harmonize the different parts of my life, then you have to change something, because otherwise none of them are going to be in balance.
Yeah. But to have that big picture, not minute by minute, how am I feeling, or day by day, but just stepping back a moment. You've spoken about when you moved out to San Francisco, that was a little jarring. I mean, you're moving to a different part of the country, your family, talk about that, because that kind of, and how that kind of felt in terms of being perhaps a little bit off balance for a small period of time.
Yeah, and I actually was off balance, and it took me by surprise. We talked about growing up. I moved around a lot. My dad was sort of climbing the corporate ladder, and we moved a lot when I was young, and I really never had trouble adjusting to that. And so I always thought of myself as a person who was flexible and open to new adventures and things like that. And so when the folks in California joined us in 2003, we opened 3 new offices out there. We opened in Northern California for the first time. Morgan Lewis had never been in Northern California. We opened a second office in Southern California, and I had been involved a lot in the recruiting of those folks. And so the chair of our firm asked if I would go out there. So my husband and I and our 2 younger kids relocated to San Francisco to sort of acclimate everybody. The older 2 were in college, the younger 2 were still at home. So we all went out there and viewed this as a great adventure. And I got out there and all of a sudden realized that all of the support systems, the doctors, the teachers, the schools, the parents, all those people that I knew and things that I knew really weren't there. And my colleagues were great, but they all knew each other and I was kind of brand new. And so it was really, I was surprised by how dislocated I felt. And we were looking for a house, so we were living in rental places, and it just was a kind of whole different experience. It turned out to be a great one, and one I think we so valued. And of course, it made great connections with our colleagues in Northern California, which I value so much to this day. But it was a little bit surprising and a little bit jarring.
Yeah. Having moved and been in some of those new situations, we lived in Atlanta and Washington and back, you can underestimate it until you're actually living it, because it's everything down to, homes, this, that, dry cleaners, where, does anybody know a good dentist? That one wasn't so good. Can we get another one, kind of thing, and all the different
parts. If
parts.
somebody gets sick at school, the other parents who, you can call somebody and say, hey, can you help me out with something? Or, and I was traveling a lot too. And it's funny, I can always date when BlackBerries and Wi-Fi on the plane came into vogue, because it sort of changed my life, because I could travel during regular hours, not just red eyes, and I could stay in touch. But when I first got out there, that wasn't the case.
The concept behind Withology is that, nobody's success, you name anybody, it's because of the people around them. It could be the chance encounter. It could be a key meeting that, strategically later on, it could be just somebody who you think about in a happy way. And you're thinking, I remember she always handled it this way. I got to remember that myself too, as well. You've talked about some of the people who have been inspirations, people that you've learned through over the years, people like Amanda Smith, who's your chief engagement officer at the firm, and Joanne Epps, who's an EVP and provost at Temple, and Madeline Bell, who is the CEO of CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, wonderful, just a brilliant leader, and Dan Hilferty, who ran for years Independence Health Group, and is a dear friend of mine as well. What have you learned from different people? Let's talk about how you do that. And, because I know for myself, sometimes I've been in situations where after a meeting, I'll write something down that said, it's not really substantive for the meeting, but it's just, I really love the way that she handled that question. I want to write this down so I remember that. And I feel like I've been a student all my life.
Well, and, you mentioned Amanda Smith, who's our chief engagement officer. So Amanda's, probably 20 years younger than I am, 15 years younger than I am. But, you learn things from even
She's
the
25.
people. Yeah. You learn things even from the people who report to you, or who you meet later in your life. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the musical Hamilton, and I had the good fortune of seeing Leslie Odom Jr. in it twice. And when he was in Philadelphia at the Kimmel Center and interviewed, I, of course, was right there in the middle of, the theater, like on the edge of my seat. And somebody asked him a question about mentors. Did you have a mentor, or, who was your mentor? And he said, well, how much time do you have? Because what he basically said is, I view as a mentor anybody I can learn something from, and I hang on to those people and I don't let go. And I thought it was really descriptive of my experience as well, because I feel all those people who you named are people I've met in different walks of my life, either, clients, community service, friends, different sort of things, people at work. And I've learned so much from just watching what other people do. And, one of the things that I worry about in the current remote world that we're in, and as we're all trying to figure out the future and the hybrid working, is so many of the things I learned from being in rooms and watching how people did things, the way they came into a room, the way they left the room, the way they greeted people, the conversations in the hall, the way they interacted with me outside the meeting, and looking at the way people conduct themselves and the way they use their intelligence, the way they bring other people in. All of the people who you just mentioned, I didn't even think of this until right now, but they all have in common a great facility for running a meeting, bringing people together, and making every person feel individually important. And I think those are really, really great talents to have, but they're hard to learn and they're hard to develop if you're sitting in your living room by yourself. So I think one of the things we're all going to have to figure out here is how to give people the exposure to have those opportunities, to see those things, to have that nuance, to be in a room where you notice that somebody who you think has something to say isn't speaking up. Or when you leave the meeting, you can just kind of tell from the way somebody's looking that they're either feeling really good or really bad. And you figure out, is it something that went on in that meeting, or is something going on with them? So, I feel like I'm always learning things from other people, how they handle situations. And I agree with you. I leave things and I think, boy, that person really handled that well. Or sometimes I think, you know what?
I learned from
that really didn't work so well. And maybe I should make sure I'm not doing that. Or maybe I should think twice about the way I'm framing something, because, now that I look at it, it doesn't work so well.
Yeah, it's, when I was a young child, I just always loved to read kind of history, and particularly bios, because you learn some things from it and I could kind of absorb it. Early on in my career, I had the opportunity of working very closely with Joe Neubauer, who outsourced communications with then Aramark.
Fabulous person, fabulous leader.
And a friend 35 years later and a client. But I remember early on, I'd come to his weekly meetings, and there's guys running the international division of this and this and this. And after a couple of weeks, I would be taking notes. And he said to me, boy, and I said, Joe, I feel like I'm getting an MBA here, just listening to you speak. It's just so interesting to see how you handle things. And I remember one time somebody came in with a big, thick book. He said, well, that looks like you have some bad news I like thin books or something like that. It was a joke about it. But yeah, just that sense of which we're losing temporarily, at least now, and we have to really try to gain it. Because I worry about young people coming up who aren't having the first couple of years of experience where it is just walking down the hallway, the coffee shop, hearing somebody say something. We're getting some questions in here now. So, and if you have questions, please submit them and we'd be happy to kind of answer them in the next 12 minutes. I guess we have. Jami, what's your advice for young people, particularly in the early stages of their career?
So, it's interesting. I think about this a lot because people give you this great advice. What did they say? Do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life or something like that. And I think, gee, that sounds really good, but very few people like walk out of school and walk into the perfect dream job for them.
Yeah.
I got pretty lucky in that respect because honestly, I walked in the door at Morgan Lewis and I really used to say, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop and it still hasn't dropped. And that's true. But part of that is because I really went in with the view that I was just going to give it my best. And I was going to kind of embrace the organization, and I think a lot of people, whether because they're skeptical or they're shy or the worst reason, which is you think it's cool to be diffident, people hold back a little bit. And I think the truth of the matter is enthusiasm and engagement are the best tools you can bring to a job.
Yeah.
If you are willing to just lean into whatever the opportunities are and be present and engaged and enthused about what you're doing, you will really get more out of it. And most people will really give you a chance to thrive. What I would say is if you're working someplace and that's you're bringing that enthusiasm and engagement and you're really trying to participate and you're in an organization where people don't value or appreciate that, then you are in the wrong job.
Yes.
Because I don't think you can succeed someplace where people aren't invested in you and want you to succeed. And so I would say bring enthusiasm, bring engagement, don't be cynical, don't hold back. But if after you do that and you give it a fair chance, you feel like that isn't being matched, then I would reevaluate whether or not you made the right choice. But you're not going to be thrilled every minute, no matter where you are. And I think, it's always dangerous to draw analogies to parenting or marriage because not everybody has a partner, not everybody has children. But, for me, they're easy ones. If you go into a marriage thinking every single day is going to be a honeymoon, or if you go into having children thinking that over 20, 30 years, every day your child is going to be nothing but a cooperative, wonderful joy for whom everything goes perfectly, you're going to be a pretty unhappy person because reality is not going to be that. And the same thing is true for a job. No matter how much you love your job, no matter how engaged you are, there are going to be days that aren't so great. Yeah. And so you have to be able to put those in perspective.
I always like the quote from Thomas Edison. Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and it looks like work. And there are those. I've had a chance of lots of times going to colleges and speaking to students about careers and things like this. And I remember myself when I was in college, I had friends who, when I'm 30, I'm going to do this in Wall Street. And when I'm 40, and I remember thinking sometimes like, I wasn't really sure. I guess I'll go to law school. I wasn't sure what. Later on in life, I realized the key thing is just, and the analogy I'll use with college students is a lot of people stand around the swimming pool. In the end, get into the pool, make sure there's enough water, and start swimming. And something good comes of it. And for me too, it was just, this is the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to try really hard. And other times I've been with people where it was a kind of a dark spot, and I realized after a year, I'm not learning anything. Everybody here is in silos and they're negative, and this is not. So I'm going to pull out of this one here too. But being willing to just jump in.
Well, and the Angela Duckworth and others have done all these stories about grit, and the shorthand bottom line is passion and perseverance is often worth more than talent, right? And the reality is that if you dedicate yourself to something and you bring your passion to that effort and you persevere at it, you have a better shot of succeeding than if you just bring your raw talent and skill. Now, obviously, got to have some luck along the way. You can have the most passion and the most perseverance, and you could work for a company that goes under. I mean, there's, it's not going to be perfect, but the thing is, you have to position yourself to be able to take advantage of opportunity and luck when it comes your way. And if you are bringing those things to the table, you're at least positioning yourself to do that.
Here's another question. Given your incredibly busy schedule, do you ever get time to read for pleasure? And if so, what are you reading now?
So that's a really good question. I used to be just obsessive about books. My go on vacation, I would go to a bookstore. I'd end up with a big canvas bag full of books and I would read voraciously. And I found over the years that I haven't been able to do that as much because of my work schedule. But what I've substituted it with is books on tape, which I have found to be fantastic. I'm a huge Audible user. And I kind of the wide range of things, I've listened to the biography of Alexander Hamilton on, books on tape. I listen to a lot of fiction books on tape. I like murder mysteries. I'm a big Sue Grafton fan. I like P.D. James. I just have listened again to a book called Leaving Time by Jodi Picoult, which I find really interesting, but very fiction oriented. And I'll also listen to nonfiction on tape. So I just downloaded something that, I thought would be good to listen to. So I find books on tape when I'm in the car for long trips or on an airplane or going to bed at night or taking the dog for a walk or just trying to get some fresh air. I can sort of read by listening.
Books on tape is a great way to kind of go and feeling like you're filling and you're stretching and you're getting your mind off of something and learning too as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a good distraction. I mean, my favorite distraction is cooking. I love to cook, and I find that cooking is the one thing I can do that if I just am cooking in the kitchen, thinking about cooking and food, it's a break from kind of the things I'm always thinking about, and that's a good mind reset. But the same thing with books on tape. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't get my mind back to sort of a more peaceful place because there's too many things spinning around, I can listen to something fiction story or something where it doesn't really matter. And I find that to be a good reset too.
And cooking is really interesting too. I've always loved, especially because I could do something, it starts and it finishes and it's creative. So what's your favorite dish that you cook?
So it changes over time. I have some, family favorites and specials. Cheesesteak spring rolls is a pretty big one. I've been loving making paella. I like to make that. I like, making big Thanksgiving dinners and things like that. Chicken marsala, but I'll kind of make anything. I really just enjoy cooking. My husband always laughs because when fall comes, he waits for soup day because I wake up some fall morning and hit the farmer's market and just like make 5 or 6 different kinds of soup and the whole kitchen looks like a bomb hit it.
And then you put them in frozen contators and you can have it. And then about 6 months later, you toss some of it out. And
everybody watches football and, eat soup. But I also think for me, the thing that's nice about cooking is it also is a way of doing something for people that you care about. It's doing something for somebody else. And that's always I think, my husband has a master's in applied positive psychology. And he always talks about, doing things for other people is one of the things that you can do most for yourself.
Yes.
Because it really makes you feel good. And I agree with that. And I think I've seen that play out in the form of cooking.
Okay, one final question. Favorite part of being a lawyer? What do you like most about the legal field right now?
Representing clients. I mean, somebody interviewed me once and I realized from the questions they were asking that a common theme in my life from being the oldest sister to being a lifeguard to being a lawyer is I get to feel like I'm helping other people. I get to feel like I'm helping solve other people's problems. And that's a gift to be able to do that, to feel like your job every day is helping somebody who has a problem. Sometimes it's a good problem, sometimes it's a bad problem, but you're helping somebody figure out how to solve that problem. And I think that makes this job a really great job.
Oh, that's great. It's a great way to look at life, isn't it, too? And particularly as a lawyer, too. You're helping somebody through some challenging moment and feeling good. There's lots of times when you think about the law, that would be your first perception being an outsider, but that sense that when you're in it, you're doing
a lot of people don't think that way about lawyers, but for me, it is. And of course, obviously, I'm so blessed to have such a large group of friends and colleagues at a firm where people are good to each other and care about each other and others. So, I have the joy of being a lawyer, which is doing something I love at a place that I love doing it. So it's I'm a very lucky woman.
That's great. Well, Jami, it's been a pleasure to have you here on this live version of Withology here at the PHL Innovation Festival. Again, Jami is the chair of Morgan Lewis, which is the 7th largest law firm in the world, over 2,000 lawyers in continents around the globe, and the largest law firm run by a woman, and a very special woman who has this global view, but in the end, enjoys cooking at times for her family too as well. So Jami, I've known you for a long time. It's a pleasure to have, and thank you so much for being part of this today.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Brian. Good to see you.
See you too.
Bye-bye.